Hi there, and welcome to Off the Data Provided an Interpersonal Communication Podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Dr. Marcus C. Shepard. On today's episode, we are going to talk about infidelity or cheating. It's been a hot button topic that I've seen across social media very recently. There was kind of a viral tweet of someone exposing their partner of several years of cheating on them with several people. It's also something I have received in my email around Ask Dr. Shepard, people asking me questions about infidelity, how to work through it. So I thought it would be meaningful to have a brief conversation just on what is infidelity or cheating, how we can look at it, how we might change our views around it, and leave you with some questions and thoughts to chew on. With that said, of course, if you would like to submit an Ask Dr. Shepard, feel free to email me at offthedataprovided@gmail.com. Once again, that is offthedataprovided@gmail.com. We won't be having one this week, but we definitely will the next time. So, with that said, when we think about infidelity or cheating, we're going to kind of more so refer to it as infidelity or affairs in the terms of this podcast. We know that infidelity is often poorly understood. We know that when it comes to infidelity or affairs, the tracks of it usually are along the lines of desire when someone maybe doesn't feel desired, so they go looking for it elsewhere. These infidelities or affairs have a lot to teach us, though, about relationships. I think it opens up questions about what we expect from relationships, what we think we want in relationships, what we feel entitled to in relationships, as well as thinking about our own personal and collective attitudes about love, lust, and commitment. So we've talked about commitment before on the podcast. We've also talked about love and lust before on the podcast. As we have said, just a brief reminder, commitment is not feeling, it's an action. It's active, it's not passive. Commitment is actually showing up, doing the things. And with a lot of relationships, I feel like commitment is an issue, not even just romantic relationships, but also platonic relationships. Are we committed? Are we showing up? Are we responding? Are we doing the things we say we were going to do? Along those lines, I think that affairs or cheating, infidelity, open up conversations about other key concepts such as fidelity, loyalty, desire, longing, possessiveness, jealousy, truth-telling, and forgiveness. And when it usually comes to conversations around just cheating in general, they tend to be divisive, judgmental, and short-sighted, and therefore we don't really get into the meat and the potatoes of all of these different avenues that the conversation could go to, as I highlighted. What's important oftentimes when someone has been cheated on is they want to know what happened, why it happened, why they kind of crashed and burned. Could it have been prevented? Is there something they could have done differently? And understand or learn from it and hopefully fly again, whether in that same relationship or in a new relationship. But what's also going to be important for us to underscore in our conversation today around cheating and infidelity is that understanding it doesn't mean justifying it. It just means that you are trying to be enlightened about why it happened to you in this particular circumstance and how potentially to avoid it. We know that affairs are oftentimes acts of betrayal that are also expressions of longing and loss. And either or discourse does not usually invite understanding or even reconciliation. If you're just trying to think about betrayal, and not how it is maybe an expression of longing or loss, you're not going to maybe get to wider conversations about what you expect, what we think we want, what we feel entitled to, and talking about fidelity, loyalty, desire, longing, jealousy, possessiveness, truth-telling, forgiveness. You're probably not going to get to that. So it's important when we think about infidelity or cheating that we don't look at it in these binary binoculars, that it's either or. And we also know, though we won't really be discussing open relationships in our conversation today, that they're not guaranteed against deception and infidelity either. As we have talked about before on the podcast with polyamorous relationships, sometimes people still break the rules that they have agreed upon, and that is a source of infidelity that exists in polyamorous relationships as well. So just because someone is open or they're not in a monogamous relationship, if they're in maybe a non-monogamous relationship, doesn't mean that they aren't free of deception either. A book that I think is actually really helpful around this entire topic is going to be The State of Affairs, Rethinking Infidelity by Esther Perel. She is a psychologist who has written on this topic and really gives some great insights. And I'll probably pull some of her insights into our larger conversation. One thing I know that she asks in the book is, why does sexual betrayal hurt so much? Also, is an affair always selfish or weak, or can it be in some cases understandably acceptable? Or could it even be viewed as an act of boldness and courage? So you might be thinking these questions, right? Is it understandable and acceptable? Is it boldness? Is it courage? Like, how could someone even theorize or think of that? But we also need to take a step out or take a step back and go back to how, as I said before, affairs can teach us about relationships, what we feel entitled to. Oftentimes when we are in committed romantic relationships, people feel entitled to someone's body, someone's whole self, and that's just not the case at all. So when it comes to that, we have these unspoken conversations oftentimes when it comes to infidelity, and we feel betrayed because sometimes we have a set of assumptions that we assume our partner has agreed to and not something that we have usually spent much time explicitly discussing or negotiating. So what is clear is that infidelity is characterized by a breach of a contract between two people, and that core betrayal is this violation of trust. But what we have to really get into the core of is, have we really parsed out what this breach of contract was? Have we fully expressed what our non-negotiables are? Oftentimes with assumptions, as we've talked about before, we assume we have the same meaning on concepts. We assume we have the same values as someone. And oftentimes through infidelity, it can sometimes be revealed that maybe you don't have those at hand. And social media, of course, our favorite thing, one of my favorite things to talk about, has made it even harder to figure that out. Thanks to social media, you no longer really need to leave your house to quote unquote stray. You can have an affair while lying on the couch next to your partner. The internet has made sex more accessible, more affordable, and even more anonymous than ever before. You don't have to exchange kisses with someone. You could exchange nudes with them. Maybe it's not a motel visit, as Esther Perel talks about, but maybe it's late night Snapchats that you're sending back and forth with someone. Maybe it's not a secret lunch break, but a secret Instagram account that you are messaging multiple people in that your partner has no clue about. So while, of course, we are all tempted to reduce affairs to sex and lies, it's important to know that infidelity is a portal into the complex landscape of relationships and the boundaries we draw to bind them. What's also important to think about is, does passion have a finite shelf life? Has maybe monogamy outlived its usefulness? What is fidelity? What does that actually mean? Can we also maybe love more than one person at a time? I think talking about these things, I'm not going to answer a lot of these questions because, as we've talked about on this podcast before, especially when it's interpersonal communication, we all have our own definitions. We all have our own guidelines. We all have our own boundaries. But what's going to be really important is that you tease those out for any committed romantic relationship or partner, not just assuming that you both have the same meaning or both have the same understanding. A perfect example is flirting. Flirting is a really nebulous term. What is flirting? Leaving hard eyes underneath someone's cute picture on Instagram or Twitter, is that flirting? Is DMing somebody a cute little saying on their story flirting? For some people, sure it is, and that's completely fine. For other people, it's not. But if you haven't had those conversations with your partner and you're assuming you both have the same meaning and understanding of that, you're setting yourself up for a rocky future. Because I would argue the majority of us do not have the exact identical understandings. But as I said before, we are holding our partners to those things that we haven't discussed with them. And that is ultimately unfair. So we need to figure out what draws us outside of these boundaries if you are someone who's been guilty of infidelity. What is fear of loss that accompanies it that keeps you making it a secret? And what is the atmosphere of trust that can actually promote intimacy and commitment? How can we build an atmosphere of trust that will allow us to be committed, right? That active aspect, and also promote intimacy. As I said before, we are holding on to these things that we have not spelled out. I'm saying it multiple times because repetition is hopefully a good way for it to resonate or to get into people. But the core of betrayal is the violation of trust. And that trust is oftentimes a betrayal of a set of assumptions that we assumed that our partner agreed to, though we didn't explicitly discuss or negotiate them with that partner. And as we've talked about before, it's important to really let your partner know your non-negotiables, which you're unwilling to tolerate. So I always let people know what my non-negotiables are. They can be whatever you want them to be. So, of course, a non-negotiable for mine is cheating. I don't tolerate someone stepping out and having a sexual relationship outside of our relationship. Once I find out, I immediately end the relationship, as I have done in the past. I take COVID very seriously, so that is also a non-negotiable for me. So if you don't take COVID seriously, you're not someone I'd be interested in a committed long-term romantic partnership with. I also am not interested in having children whatsoever. So these are things that I explicitly discuss with people beforehand. And oftentimes we discuss these well before a first date. As I was literally just texting my friend Cameron yesterday, I don't want kids. He was like, oh, you say that now. I was like, no, it's a non-negotiable. I said, I literally let anybody know. And there's no way you even get to a first date with me if you're someone that wants kids, because there's just no point. And kids are not something you negotiate. Okay, I don't want kids, but you want 3 kids, so let's have 1. No, I don't want kids at all. I'm not going to negotiate that. So it's really important that we have these explicit conversations about what we desire, what we want. What Esther Perel does a great job in her book, again, the book is called The State of Affairs, Rethinking Infidelity, is she outlines 3 elements that are included in infidelity. And she says that one or more of these elements are part of it. Those 3 elements are going to be secrecy, sexual alchemy, and emotional involvement. So with secrecy, we know that an affair always lives in the shadows of the primary relationship. It hopes to never be discovered oftentimes by that person. And the secrecy is what intensifies that erotic charge. But what's important to also think about when it comes to secrecy is, when does privacy end and secrecy begin? So we know, for instance, that everybody deserves to have privacy in any relationship that they have. I was talking about this recently with a friend because he was going through breakup with a situationship, I would call it. They weren't in a committed romantic relationship, and issues around privacy/secrecy came up. And I said, well, it's important for you to define what is privacy versus what is secrecy. There are some things that maybe you don't feel comfortable sharing or don't want to share with someone that don't really have much bearing on their relationship. and that's your privacy. But then there is potentially secrecy, things that might impact the relationship if someone is aware of those things. And that is something that you should share with that person. So we had a really good conversation, my friend and I, around that, highlighting that some of the things that he maybe didn't feel comfortable sharing were just privacy things. And maybe as the relationship bloomed, he would feel more comfortable discussing those things with her. And it wasn't really things that were quote unquote secrets that was hiding, that hopes that the person doesn't find out because then maybe they wouldn't want to be in a relationship. Perfect example would be, right, going back to some of my non-negotiables, if someone lied to me and said that they didn't want to have kids, but they did want to have kids. Well, that's a secret. And that is going to harm the relationship because down the line, you might resent me for the fact that I'm not budging on what I told you. And we've seen this happen on reality TV shows, in fictional dramas, where people get together and say they don't want one thing, and then times change, and the person's like, well, I thought you would grow out of it. Perfect example, I watched the soap opera Beyond the Gates. And one of the couples on there, the woman has been adamant that she does not want children. Her husband was like, I know you said that, but I thought maybe you would grow out of it. And she's like, no, this is what I said. And they hit a little rock in their marriage over that because he thought she would change and want kids, and he kind of desires children. Well, that's not going to change. So that was a little secrecy on his part. The second element, sexual alchemy, is not just a sexual act, but includes maybe the broader understanding of the erotic mind, body, and energy. We know that sometimes affairs don't even involve sex, the actual act of sex, but they're always erotic. So we know that desire is oftentimes rooted in absence and longing. And many affairs are less about the physical act of actual sex, but more so about the desire to feel desired, to feel special, to feel seen and connected, to compel and demand attention from someone. So all of that carries erotic goosebumps, as I like to call them, that make us feel alive, renewed, and recharged. This is maybe why some people post things that they post on social media, for the ability to feel desired. Now, is that infidelity? Is that cheating? I don't know. It depends on what the two people in the relationship define that to be. There are people who are in full-fledged committed romantic relationships with people who are content creators of the erotic persuasion. And they, I would hope, have had long, deep, meaningful conversations on what is the boundary, what is the line for them, what do they feel comfortable with. Clearly, you might collaborate with people, so that's not cheating, but what do I want to know about that, or what is off limits, or what are you able to do? Or some people who are solo content creators, what is maybe appropriate for them to post, what is maybe you would not want them to post or feel uncomfortable them posting. These are really important conversations to be had. And even with social media, just in general, you shouldn't police what your partner posts, but you all should have conversations about what you are comfortable with, what maybe makes you feel uncomfortable, and why you feel uncomfortable with that. Just because you don't like it isn't necessarily the reason that someone shouldn't do it, because again, you do not own someone's body, that you are not owed that. You are not owed decency, quote unquote, from them. They are choosing to be in a committed romantic relationship with you. They are deciding to share their body with you. They are choosing to do these things, right? These are active choices of that person, but that does not mean that you automatically get those things. And of course, as we have been somewhat discussing, the internet, right, cyberspace adds a further twist to all of this. Is virtual sex real? Are sexually explicit DMs real? Is that cheating? Are sending nudes to somebody else cheating? Are liking someone else's nudes cheating? Right? Some people have public profiles, especially I think about on Twitter, where they're kind of XXX accounts, where they're posting explicit. Are following those accounts cheating? Is pleasuring yourself to those things cheating? Is it? Is it not? Is it infidelity? These are things you have to define with your partner. And I think the majority of people, as we've said before, make assumptions that, well, I think it's cheating, so it's cheating. But you didn't actually tell your partner that. So now you're accusing your partner of cheating to because they follow or like this account or have engaged with the account, but you all have never explicitly said what is or what isn't. And that is what's going to be really important. If there's anything you get from this podcast series, it's always to have that metacommunication, that communication about communication. What does this mean? How do we define it? And also, another important thing when it comes to that sexual alchemy, that second element, is do we expect our partner's erotic selves to belong entirely to us? We've been talking around that, especially on the internet, for some people who are content creators or people who just enjoy posting things. I enjoy posting selfies of myself. I know that some people like my big thighs, or it's been clear that people enjoy my feet. I usually am barefoot in my house, and because I'm COVID informed, I usually, if I'm taking a photo shoot, it's at my house, so I'm usually barefoot and hot a lot, so I'm in shorts a lot. So those things are shown. If I'm in a relationship, is that a problem that I post those photos? For me, it's not. If someone finds that to be so, then maybe we aren't compatible. So we know that every couple has to negotiate each other's erotic independence as part of larger conversations about individuality and their connection. So it's going to be important to talk about those things explicitly. And usually we don't, as we said before, because we just assume, well, what I do or what I believe is what someone else would believe, or I feel like this is just a common acceptable understanding of this, so I assume this person is going to have the same understanding. Back up a bit. Let's have that meta communication. And then, of course, the last element is emotional involvement. And we know that there may be no feelings attached to a random hookup, but there's plenty of meaning to the fact that it happened and emotions attached. You might not actually have any emotions towards that person, but there are emotions attached to that act, to the infidelity, to the cheating, to the affair. So what does that mean? We know a lot of times people step out, they might get on hookup apps and hook up with someone they don't even know their first or last name. They might not even know what they look like. It might be an anonymous hookup. They've just exchanged nudes and they've hooked up that way. Clearly, there's not really any emotions there. Sometimes they might not even kiss. It just might be a physical release. But there still is emotions attached to it. Why did you feel the need to? And as we have highlighted before, it's oftentimes desire, which is oftentimes rooted in absence and longing. Longing to feel desired, longing to feel special, longing to feel seen, to feel connected, to be compelled and demand attention. And that also brings us to this aspect or idea of emotional affairs. And so sometimes, as Esther Perel has highlighted, this term applies to relationships that are generally platonic, but are perceived to be too close. And I've experienced this firsthand with some of my friends. Dr. Anderson, especially, right? She now just alerts people who she is going to be dating about me in her life. Literally, first date question I have, someone who's super close, basically like a brother to me. And And if you have a problem with that, then we're not aligned. Because I remember one of her former romantic partners swore that her and I were having an affair. Mind you, Dr. Anderson and she literally is my big sister. It would be incest, right? And also, clearly, I'm not interested, nor is she, right? People sometimes mistake us as a couple because, of course, we're two attractive individuals and we look good with each other and we have such a loving rapport and deep intimacy with each other. But we're not having an emotional affair. We just have a super close, tight friendship. That's literally my sister. And what we know when it comes to this idea of emotional affairs, for many today, marriage or deep committed romantic relationships are wedded to this concept of emotional intimacy when our innermost lives belong to someone else and therefore can feel as if it's a betrayal if they share that aspect with other people. But what Esther Perel highlights, what I thought was really important in this book, is that emphasizing the emotional as infidelity never even occurred in earlier generations whose concepts of marriage were not organized around emotional exclusiveness. This is very much a thing that has become something over the last 60 plus years, or maybe not even 60 plus years, but over the last few decades of certain things belong just to your partner. And when we channel all of our intimate needs into one person, it actually stands to maybe make that relationship more vulnerable because they hold so much power and so much information about you that you haven't shared with other people, and you're really relying on that person, that it can put it in a pressure cooker that it doesn't need to be put into. So I've talked about before, I have my Power Rangers, who are kind of my 5 closest friends. We've talked about that before. And I share everything with these people. Back when I was young and single, right? Some of them, right, fresh off hooking up with somebody, I would call them right away and we would go through the details of what happened and kiki about it, and vice versa. Or even now, some of them, right, they'll call me like, oh my God, guess what I just did, right? There's a no holds barred, there's a deep intimacy there and connection. And we hold things for each other. But I'm not the only one holding that for my close friends, nor are they the only ones holding it for me. So when they are in committed romantic relationships, they're not putting all of their eggs in that one basket, which is going to be really important. And so throughout this, brief conversation, I think it's also important to just pause and think about, so after talking through some of these concepts, what does infidelity mean to you specifically? And how do you feel about it? I think with the rise of individualism, the mandate that happiness has to be something that exists fully in matrimony or committed romantic relationships, and even the rise of consumer culture, that affairs are not what they used to be because marriage is not what it used to be either. We know that no-fault divorce law passed in California back in 1969 and adopted elsewhere shortly after, or in a majority of states, meant that women could leave and there needed to be a better reasons to stay in their marriage. Therefore, the bar for marital equality rose, and monogamy was one of those things. So women were getting cheated on, but the no-fault law didn't exist, so a lot of times women had to stay. Now, monogamy has maybe shifted. It used to be one person for life, but maybe now, post, let's say 1970, it now means one person at a time. That time, though, has also gotten longer. With advances in science and modern medicine, people are now living almost double their life expectancy from even the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, right? People were not living to their 70s, 80s, 90s as they are now. We also, and this is something really important that I think I'm going to belabor for a moment, we expect one person, as we've kind of highlighted before, to give us what we used to get from a whole village of people. And so we're living twice as long. We're expecting one person to provide what multiple people used to provide. And I think that's really a lofty task, a tall order for a couple to do. When we think about even marriage, right, the wedding used to be two communities coming together and celebrating a couple and uniting these two communities behind this couple, and these communities would be there to help usher in that couple and support them through their commitment of marriage. But now the wedding doesn't really mean that. Now, oftentimes at weddings, these two different communities are meeting for the first time, and it might be the only time they meet. And so how are we supporting you? Because of individualism, a lot of people aren't building communities that can support them, that can help take the load off of their committed romantic partnership in ways and generations before had. I look at even my parents' generation, right? They have super close friends that they've been close to for 40 plus years now that are still actively in their lives, that they go on vacations with, that they do all of these things with, sometimes together as couples, sometimes separately, boys' trips, girls' trips. That doesn't happen as much in this younger generation. Sure, some people might have fraternity or sorority friends or some college friends, but a lot of trips are more so just couple trips. maybe they do a friendship trip if they're single, but a lot of times when people get in committed romantic relationships, specifically married couples in this generation, they kind of make more insular lives. So we need to think about that and how that might be adding to the pressure of the pot. I'm fumbling my words because I'm searching for, I think it's like the Instapot, right? This high pressure situation that might then breed infidelity at a more alarming rate because you are relying on this one person to provide you all of these things. And the burnout is real. And maybe they need to just take a step out. Maybe I just want to feel desired. I don't want to have to be the therapist, the cook, the maid, all of these things of this person. I just want to be a hot girl or a hot boy for a moment. Might be a reason why they stepped out. Doesn't mean that that is a valid reason. Of course not. As we've said earlier, just because we are trying to understand infidelity doesn't mean that we are trying to justify it. But I think it's important to try and understand where it comes from, why it exists, why it has happened, so that we can avoid those pitfalls that are breeding grounds for the infidelity, as well as hopefully having really great conversations that if someone is feeling a possible moment of weakness, that they feel comfortable coming to you. I remember I had a friend in Los Angeles back when I lived there who was in a pretty long-term committed romantic relationship, and the sex had fallen off. They weren't having sex anymore. And my friend told him, he said, "Hey, we've been together for a while. We're not really having sex. I want to have sex. I desire to have sex. I'm not trying to force you to have sex, but I want to feel desired in that way. And if you're not willing to do that, I'm going to step out and find it somewhere else." And he did. Was it right? No. Was it okay? No. But I will give him the benefit that he told his partner, "Hey, I'm feeling this issue. If we can't resolve this issue," and to his credit, he did give the partner a few months to hopefully figure it out. It didn't happen. He stepped out. As I told him back then, and as I held now, hey, that was such a big issue. When you felt the need to fully step out, you should have just ended the relationship. Why are you staying? And of course, we had some interesting conversations around that because everything else was great besides that aspect. And the partner wasn't interested in opening the relationship for that aspect to be fixed. So as I told him back then, well, you guys weren't compatible. Maybe the relationship has run its course. That's neither here nor there, right? And we know, of course, getting back into the internet, we know that the swiping culture of Tinder, of any of these hookup apps, of Bumble, of Hinge, lure us with infinite possibilities. But it also invites unfavorable comparisons, weakens commitment, and prevents us from really being present in the moment. We've talked about this before with the illusion of perspective theory that I created, or concept, I should say, that I created, which talks about the fact that a lot of people just maintain or are perpetually single because they're always thinking there's somebody better. There's always a better swipe. There's always a better match. There's always someone more attractive, hotter, makes more money, more aligned, more this, more that. So we never fully engage with what's in front of us. And that has been a real big issue. And we can see how that can bleed into what's happening with infidelity. And what's important when we look at infidelity or affairs, they also highlight the passing of two illusions that I think we all have, that your relationship or your marriage is exceptional and that you are unique or you are prized because the person stepped out. So clearly your relationship isn't exceptional and you aren't as unique or as prized as you thought because of that. But as we've talked about this shift in kind of our culture, marriage used to be an economic arrangement. And so infidelity before threatened economic security. I think about the Gilded Age TV show on HBO Max, where one of the characters literally is going through a divorce and she is going through economic insecurity because her husband makes all the money, right? Especially at the turn of that century. Women really weren't working. Women didn't really have money. So him cheating and now choosing to leave was economic insecurity. Where today, marriage is more so rooted in romantic arrangement, and therefore infidelity threatens our emotional security. We feel less desired. We feel maybe less worthy. We feel unattractive. We feel a lot of these negative valence terms when we find out that our partner has maybe stepped out on us. So we know that infidelity also, I think this will be the last point I want to touch on today, is that it's a direct attack on our memory of the past. You're not only hijacking our future, right, our hopes and our plans, but it actually draws a huge question mark over our history. We lose and suffer a loss of a coherent narrative of who we were, who we are, and what this relationship looked like and used to be. Now you're second questioning and guessing, oh, when they say they were going here, were they really going here, or were they doing something else? And as I tell anybody, once you lose trust, there's no point in being in that relationship anymore. If I feel the need to go through your phone, if I feel the need that I can't trust you, why are we here? What is this relationship really serving? So these have just been a few musings on infidelity to just get us all thinking about it, hopefully differently, get us to understand it from a more nuanced perspective. Because as we said before, usually conversations around cheating, affairs, infidelity are divisive, they're judgmental, they're short-sighted, they're right versus wrong. And because they're not as nuanced, it doesn't really allow us to actually understand why the infidelity occurred, how it got to the space or place, why that person felt the need or desire to step out, and how to maybe foster a better communication climate for you to not hit those snags. So one, of course, would be really outlining and having that metacommunication around what different acts mean, what those boundaries are, what these terms look like and mean for you. So what is love? What is lust? What is commitment? What is fidelity? What is loyalty? What is desire? What is longing? What is jealousy? What is possessiveness? What is truth-telling? What is forgiveness? What do these things mean? What do they look like? Let's define them. Let's put actions. Let's put examples to them so that our partner understands where we're coming from and negotiate that. They might not fully understand nor agree with your definition. And so it's important to figure out what their definition is and is there commonplace. What do we feel entitled to in a relationship? What do we think we want in a relationship? What do we expect in a relationship? These are going to be important questions for us to talk about with ourselves, but also with our partners as well. And through hopefully having these dialogues with yourself, as well as your potential partner or even your current partner, you can maybe avoid the pitfalls that happen and come that lead to infidelity, that create the breeding ground where someone doesn't feel desired, where someone feels as if they need to step out to feel or find something that they are maybe no longer receiving in the relationship, or something that they want to receive in the relationship, but maybe they don't feel comfortable telling or talking to you about. So these are just a few musings on infidelity. It clearly is something that happens sometimes in committed romantic relationships and is something we should clearly be more fully aware of. We should try and understand, as I said, but understanding is not justification. We are just trying to figure out how we got here, how we maybe can move forward, whether that's forgiveness or breaking up, as well as moving forward with future relationships. What are the building blocks that we can set up beforehand to hopefully avoid the pitfalls that come with maybe feeling a loss of desire and intimacy that might lead to the infidelity? And as Esther Perel helpfully underscored, right, infidelity includes one or more of the three elements of secrecy, sexual alchemy, or emotional involvement. So those are my thoughts on infidelity for today. It's something we will, of course, come to again throughout this podcast. As always, I recommend that you check out Esther Perel's book, The State of Affairs, Rethinking Infidelity. I went over a few of her broad strokes of the book, but she really provides a lot of helpful tips and tricks that clearly I'm not going to talk about because that's what her book is for. But if you have enjoyed listening to kind of this, definitely check out her book. And as always, I will see you all on the next one. Goodbye.